So, as Liz said, I've been going around the country talking about Hillary since I think the end of November. Because, as you guys all know, we're in in a way the election of certainly of my lifetime. You know, the distinction that we're looking at could not be more stark. And what I have been most inspired by in the past, what has been almost a year, not quite, 10 months that I've been traveling around doing this, has been people like you. The fact that you all are taking your Sunday, and I'm sure most other days, to go out and do the real work, the real grassroots work of talking to people, of knocking on doors and making phone calls. That's what I've seen around this country, and it's given me so much, such a sense of optimism about our system. How's it going? I'm Tony. It's given me such a sense of optimism and has, really obliterated whatever cynicism I had about our political system. Because whatever our problems are, and however imbalanced it is in some ways, in terms of too much money in politics, and the sort of vested interests seeming to control the process in very unfair ways. The truth that I've seen is where it really happens is at the grassroots and on the community level. And the fact of people like you guys who are willing to and eager to give your time to go out and do this work, it really is the thing that makes the system work. And a counterintuitive example for me, which is what I think we're fighting against in such a big way, is what the Republicans have done so skillfully over the past 20 years. And that is, on a grassroots level, to go out and advocate and spend not too much money on changing school boards and local politics on the absolute local level, on the community level. And what they have been successful in doing is using that to gerrymander voting districts. And it's how, even with a minority of voters as registered Republicans, they have been able to take over the House and the Senate.
That's right.
And have made a concerted effort to dominate the Supreme Court. Which leads me to my next point in terms of the opportunity that we face in this election cycle. Beyond Hillary, who I want to talk for a minute about in a minute, we have a tremendous opportunity right now. Historic opportunity. For the past 50 years, the conservative movement in this country, really the extreme conservative movement, which has pretty much taken over the Republican Party, has waged a war really over the past 50 years that's been incredibly well planned out and profoundly well funded to essentially, in my view, dismantle the legacy of FDR and the New Deal and Johnson's Great Society, to undo the Voting Rights Act, to make it increasingly difficult for minorities and the working poor to even vote, to exercise their right to vote, to deprive women over their control over their bodies, to deny the very fact of climate change. The list just goes on and on and on. I don't need to tell you guys, but essentially to make the American dream accessible only to the wealthiest and most powerful. They have not been successful. President Obama has been able, in the face of the most unrelenting opposition over the past 8 years, has been able to, make historic strides on LGBT rights. Gay marriage is now the law of the land, and is suddenly become kind of just accepted. You know, it's like, oh, right, that's the way it is, as it should be. You know what I mean? And, you know, we now have, with all of its problems, which Hillary intends to target and fix, 19 million people have health insurance. There were 47 million people without health insurance in this country 8 years ago. So for whatever its flaws are, Obamacare has 90% of this country now with health insurance. You know, we're now engaged in hopefully a meaningful, for the first time, a meaningful international climate agreement. The progressive movement in this country has made profound strides in the face of the battle that I, you know, laid out. And so now we're looking at minimum of 2, maximum of 4 seats opening up in the Supreme Court. And we have an opportunity as progressives to really make this progressive agenda the law of the land for the 21st century and do what FDR did in the 20th century. And it's a, you know, aside from who is going to be in the White House, that is really a life-changing opportunity for so many people in this country. And I think it's what's got conservatives completely freaked out, because obviously they have a very different agenda than we do, and Donald Trump is their standard bearer, and I think it's, you know, for many conservatives who just want a conservative Supreme Court, now they're faced with, well, what do we do? Because we have this nutcase running for president, and you know, they've got a problem. So, you know, we have got to get this done, if only for that, which now, turning the page to this extraordinary woman that we have running for president, you know, that's the other opportunity. You know, as I said, so it's been almost a year I've been going around talking, and so why did I do this? Well, I have 2 daughters who are millennials, they're 21 and 26, and I became increasingly concerned when I started to realize how profound a division we're facing between politics of fear and xenophobia and bigotry and you know, division versus politics of unity and equality and strength through what I have always taken for granted as our core American values. So I wanted to get out there and go, wait, let's talk about, you know, what direction this country is actually going to go, and what kind of America are we going to live in the, you know, in the next generation, because as I just said, you know, this election is going to determine the course of our country for the rest of this century. So that's kind of why I got involved. The other thing was, which I've become increasingly passionate about, was I've admired Hillary Clinton for a really long time, from the time I first heard of her in 1992, when people were so alarmed at this sort of activist, powerful first lady coming into the office. And I've watched over the past 25 years a narrative being written about her, which I felt was incredibly unfair and inaccurate. And so I wanted to go out and talk about that, because the Hillary Clinton I'm familiar with is very different than the stereotype, the cliche of this this, you know, creature that you know, conservatives have sort of put out there in the public. And I feel too many people were kind of going, well, there must be some to all that, because people keep saying it. So what I did was I then thought, okay, well, I'm going to talk about this. I better learn what I'm talking about. And I went and did as much homework as I possibly could about Hillary Clinton. And I got increasingly irate when I realized that what the biggest takeaway for me was, this is a woman who has been utterly consistent in her commitment to the very same people that she's been fighting for since she was in college. And that's women and children and American families who lack the resources to fight for themselves. Period. That has been her commitment, that has been her life's work, and that has been an unshakable focus for 40 years now. That's who she is, and it's what she's done. And when you know, look back at you know, speaking of who she was in, you know, in law school, she was fascinated with what she could do for children. So she spent an extra year in law school working at the Yale Child Study Center to understand the root causes of childhood poverty in this country. When she got out of Yale Law School, she didn't go to work for a high-paying law firm. As we all know, she went to work, with Marion Wright Edelman at the Children's Defense Fund. This is a woman who at that time went down to Alabama as a 24-year-old suburban girl from Chicago, went down to Alabama all by herself undercover to root out, to expose the whites-only schools that were there claiming federal tax exemptions, and posing as the wife of a businessman who had just moved to the community, met with the headmasters of these schools and said, well, I just wanted to know what kind of school you're running here and who is accepted. And they're like, oh, don't worry, ma'am, there's only white kids here. Bingo, she wrote up a report and exposed these schools, and not only got their tax exemptions eradicated, but put a lot of these schools out of business. At the same time, she went to South Carolina to expose and change the practice of incarcerating teenage boys with adult male felons. So at that time in South Carolina, the law allowed boys as young as 12 years old to be incarcerated with adult rapists and murderers, some of whom, I heard Hillary say, didn't even have to commit a felony. If a parent went before a judge and said, my child is incorrigible, that judge could remand that kid to prison. And so, again, Hillary went in and rooted that out and got those laws changed. This gets to a point that I also want to share with you. In doing this kind of homework, I ran across this article written by a guy named Gary Wills, who is a conservative Catholic historian who wrote this profile of Hillary Clinton in the New York Review of Books in 1992 during the first Clinton campaign. And in that article, he called Hillary Clinton one of the most important scholar activists of the past 2 decades. And I thought that was fascinating for 2 reasons. Number one, I thought scholar activist is such a great way to describe Hillary Clinton, because that's really what she is. She finds a need, she studies it and becomes an absolute expert at it. More importantly, she convenes all of the stakeholders on that issue, regardless of their political persuasion, and listens to all points of view and becomes probably more knowledgeable than any of them about that issue, and formulates a plan of action, and then sees that plan of action through in order to affect change on that issue. Sometimes, it takes her decades, but she does not give up. And I think that combination of scholar and activist is such a kind of magic formula for what we need in a president. Activism is critically important, and that, again, why I applaud all of you and applaud what seems to be a renewed spirit in our country for activism. And I pray that it continues, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure it doesn't end with the presidential election. But the other part of it is follow through, and not only sounding the alarm about an issue of concern, but committing to actually creating lasting change. And that is where Hillary Clinton over and over again demonstrates that she's got the goods to get it done. If we look at what she achieved, I mentioned some of her early achievements, that Gary Wills was referring to. But she went on, when she went down to Arkansas, following when she and Bill got together and he was Attorney General, she went into private practice to earn some money for the family, becoming the first female partner at the Rose Law Firm ever in its history. She didn't turn away from public service. She redoubled her efforts and used her increasing leverage to get things done. And she advocated for poor Arkansas families, for health care for rural women, for, again, really focusing on child poverty and on education. Her husband appointed her to chair the Arkansas Educational Standards Committee, because Arkansas' educational system was in a terrible shape. And she, for example, imported this program from Israel called the Hippie Program, which was a very successful pre-K program in Israel. And she said, Bill, we're bringing this to Arkansas. And he said, okay. It became a big success in Arkansas, and now the Hippie Program is in 41 states around this country. And that's, now it's 30 years later, or more, 40 years later, 35 years later, and it's proliferated around the country, and she gets zero credit for that. But Hillary did that. She founded Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, which is does just what it sounds like it does. That is, again, still in existence today, serving hundreds of thousands of families in Arkansas. If we look at what she did in when she was First Lady, for which she took tremendous heat, trying to get universal health care passed. She failed at that. But what did Hillary do in the face of that defeat? I thought it was an ugly fight. Those of us who are old enough remember how horrible that was. And I thought she was done. I was like, well, she tried, God bless her, She got right back up, analyzed what she had done wrong, what they could do better, and what they could actually salvage in order to create some change. So what did she do? She reached across the aisle, joined hands with Orrin Hatch, who was a conservative Republican, Teddy Kennedy, who's a liberal Democrat, in the Senate, and together they formulated and got past the state children's health insurance program. And to date, SCHIP is now insures over 8 million American kids. So, again, another example of Hillary creating lasting change. We're starting to hear a lot about that now in the campaign, but she, again, got very little credit for that. And not really that interested in taking credit. I mean, one of the things I think that sometimes works to Hillary's disadvantage is she's predispositioned in her character not to really call attention to herself. She's about the work, and her Methodist upbringing, which I'm going to bastardize the phrase, but the wife is do as much good for as many people as you can for as long as you can, and she lives by that, and that often deflects attention away from herself because she really is about the work. And it's what I heard in an interview on CNN. There was a profile on her last night that was on CNN, and they were saying, well, what is this thing of people not really being able to relate to you? And she said, I don't do a good enough job communicating to people in a campaign. She said, the truth is, my approval ratings tend to be so much higher when I'm actually doing the job than when I'm seeking the job. And, honestly, I want someone who's going to be doing the job well. She told me a story about when she got into the Senate, in typical scholar activist fashion. She went around and talked to as many people in the Senate as she could, with as many senators that she respected, to see how she could be the best senator that she could be. And one of the people that she went to was Robert Byrd, who was sort of an old warhorse of the Senate. And Senator Byrd sat her down, and she said, I just wanted to get any advice that you had. And he said, well, Mrs. Clinton, there are two types of people in the Senate. There are workhorses and show horses. And you need to decide which one, you want to be. And she said, well, Senator, I think I'm a workhorse. And he said, good, that means you'll get something done. And that, in addition to scholar activist, is another great definition for Hillary Clinton. I don't need to go through all, chronologically that she has achieved, but I haven't mentioned what she's done for women. In 94 or 95 was the World Conference on Women, when she went to Beijing and said human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. That was so much more than a revolutionary speech, than a controversial, provocative thing to say. At that time, as President Clinton said, in those days in China, at that time, to say that was a revolutionary statement. But the point is, it wasn't just a statement. She didn't just make a speech. She followed that through and went around the world banging that drum, and it became what was known as the Hillary Doctrine when she became Secretary of State. And a huge part of her agenda as Secretary of State was to go around the world and promote women's rights, in countries where women are institutionally second-class citizens. And Hillary Clinton is a giant hero to women around the world, and for good reason. So, not only is Hillary the absolutely necessary choice against Donald Trump, I think we have so much to be excited about and to sort of sound the trumpet, if that's the right word, for this extraordinary woman. Because one of the things that I'm a little concerned about is because Donald Trump has dragged this campaign, this election, into such a dark place and such a dark tone, and so filled with negativity and personal, personal attacks, and it's kind of the whole thing's it's become a drag, and people I don't think have had as much opportunity as they deserve to be able to celebrate what an extraordinary woman Hillary Clinton is, because she's been sort of combating this vitriol from Trump, and she's performed amazingly in these debates, but you kind of come away from those debates just like, I can't sleep, I gotta take a shower, so I've been finding myself, really feeling the need to remind people, and unfortunately, I discovered over the months that I've been going on, so many people don't know all this stuff about her. I can't tell you the number of people every time I speak that come up and go, God, I never knew all that about her. I mean, I knew she was smart, I knew she was qualified, I know she's, been, influential for a lot of years, but I didn't know she did that. I didn't know she was an activist. Bernie kind of stole that thunder in the primaries, because he seemed like, he's the activist guy. But Hillary was doing it, while Donald Trump was, denying black people the right to live in his apartment buildings.
Right.
In the 70s, Hillary was out in Alabama, shutting down whites-only schools. Anyway, I'm super excited to be doing this. Again, it's all about what you guys are doing, because Ohio is so important, and we have 16 days left, and it's looking good nationally for Hillary, but Ohio, if we can take this state, it's game over, and equally importantly, if we can get people to connect on the down ballot races, that's really the work that we have left, that we really need to redouble our efforts. And then in the long term, to get people energized to stay engaged in the process, because it's always so disheartening that people engage in the presidential elections and then Democrats sort of evaporate in the midterms, and that's why the Republicans are in control of both houses. So I'm hoping that, people of your guys' generation is going to hold on to the spirit of activism. I'm prayerful that the Black Lives Matter movement only gets bigger, so that we can finally tackle, which Hillary fully intends to, this seminal crisis, that in our criminal justice system, and so many other big challenges that are long-term challenges that can really shift this country. So anyway, thank you all for listening. I know that we all need to work as hard for Hillary as she's going to work for us when she sits behind that desk that I pretend to sit behind. And that we can all I won't be in Ohio, but we can metaphorically join hands and watch as the glass ceiling that she put 18 million cracks in 8 years ago shatters once and for all. So anyway, thank you guys, and have a great day.